My name is Lloyd Chapman. I'm president of the American Small Business League, and I'd like to talk to you about a piece of legislation that we put together called the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act. I wrote the original draft of that bill at the DoubleTree Hotel in Durango, Colorado 2 summers ago. I wrote it on the little notepad next to the phone, and I put down, a little outline of what I thought this bill should have. And my senator here in California, Barbara Boxer, helped me put it into, legislative language. I got help from Professor Charles Tiefer, who is probably one of the nation's top legal scholars on federal contracting law. He helped me with the concepts behind it. And then Hank Johnson, Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia, helped us with the final version, which he introduced into the House of Representatives a couple of weeks ago. So the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act is designed to address a problem that's been the subject of 15 federal investigations and over 500 stories in the press over the last 7 years. My favorite investigation is Report 515 from the SBA Inspector General, and it says this: one of the largest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today is that large businesses are receiving federal small business procurement awards. That's a strong statement from an Inspector General. One of the largest challenges facing the SBA and the entire federal government today? I agree with them, and I'll tell you why. U.S. Census Bureau data tells us that 98% of all U.S. firms have less than 100 employees, and those firms are responsible for over 97% of all the new jobs. They employ about 56% of the private sector workforce, and they're responsible for about 90% of exports, 90% of technical innovations, and 90% of patents. About 28 million small businesses fall in that category. Those companies are the heart and soul of this nation's economy. Congress knew that in 1953 when they passed the Small Business Act and wrote the language that said that a fair portion of all federal contracts and subcontracts should go to small businesses. Today, that fair portion term has been turned into 23%. And all these investigations that have come out have found that most small business contracts actually go to Fortune 500 corporations here in the United States, and even some of the biggest companies in Europe. So the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act was written to stop that. In the original Small Business Act, it defines a small business as a firm that is independently owned. Well, all my attorneys tell me that independently owned would exclude publicly traded companies that are publicly owned and therefore not independently owned. So with advice of Professor Tiefer, I wrote the language to say that that the government cannot report awards to publicly traded companies as small business awards. And I think most people agree that if your company is traded on the New York Stock Exchange, you're not a small business. So that's the basic aspect of it. The second part is I've been fighting the SBA in court for 7 years to simply try to get them to give me the names of all the firms that got small business contracts. Well, I'm tired of doing that. So our bill says that the federal government will release the names of all the companies that got contracts within, I believe it's 90 days of the end of the fiscal year, and that they will report them in the name of the parent company. Today, if you want to find out who's getting small business contracts, it's virtually impossible because the government is reporting those contracts in the name of the subsidiaries. Some of these Fortune 500 corporations have, 50, 60, 70 subsidiaries, and you can't tell who's getting the money. So again, our bill is very simple and basic. It's based upon the principle that everyone I've talked to for 7 years agrees with. I have to tell you, I've never spoken to anyone that thought that Fortune 500 companies should get federal small business contracts. Never once, ever. So the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act will stop the flow of federal small business contracts to large businesses. It will require the government to release that information within 90 days at the end of the fiscal year and report those contracts in the name of the parent company. So everybody in America can simply see who is getting these contracts. That piece of legislation is probably the single strongest economic stimulus that's been proposed by anybody in the country. Now that's a bold statement. Let me back that up. Think of it this way. President Obama says he's going to create 4.1 million new jobs. I think he says he's going to create 600,000 jobs this summer. Well, let's go back to those U.S. Census Bureau statistics. If companies with less than 100 employees are responsible for 97% of the new jobs, should you maybe give them some money? So far, President Obama has given 99.8% of the stimulus funds to large businesses. That means the 28 million small businesses where most Americans work, where over 95% of all the new jobs are created, have gotten 0.2%. Let's put that into perspective. Executives in Wall Street that are responsible for the economic downturn that we're currently all struggling to handle got $18.4 billion in bonuses. And the government has given small businesses, depending on who you talk to, the biggest number I've seen is something like $5 billion. I did a piece on television the other day. The reporter said it was at $1 billion. So any way you want to look at it, it's less than 0.5% of stimulus funds have gone to the small businesses that create 98% of all the new jobs. Think about that. So the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act will redirect, I'll say, over $100 billion a year in current federal infrastructure spending to the companies where most Americans work. The law's been in place since 1953. We're just trying to close the loopholes that allowed Fortune 500 corporations to hijack most of those contracts. If you haven't seen the television pieces on that, go to our website, ASBL.com, and down at the bottom you can see some of the stories that show that Fortune 500 corporations, Walmart, Microsoft, Rolls-Royce, John Deere, Xerox, Dell Computer, these are some of the biggest companies in the world that are getting small business contracts. And that's ridiculous. So our piece of legislation is logical. By the way, it won't cost the taxpayers a dime. We're not talking about like President Obama's going to spend an additional $100 billion in infrastructure spending. We're talking about existing government expenditures for desk and paper and pens, and office supplies. Existing expenditures for infrastructure. Just do what the law says and make sure that a fair portion, or 23% of the total value of all contracts and subcontracts, go to small businesses. And it's a great piece of legislation. And I guess the last thing I want to say about that is this piece of legislation will tell you who people in Congress are. It's going to tell you who Barack Obama really is. Who would object to a piece of legislation to stop some of the biggest companies on earth from getting federal small business contracts? Well, the U.S. Chamber's against it. I know that. President Obama in February of 2008 said it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. He's done nothing to back that campaign promise up. Nydia Velázquez, who's chair of the House Small Business Committee, told people in Congress that it won't make it out of her committee. So she threatened to kill this bill before it even made it out of committee. So watch your congressman, watch President Obama, watch our leaders in Congress like Nydia Velázquez, and watch how they treat this bill. This bill, I wish we could take a vote in America. If we went out there and polled people in America and said, do you think Fortune 500 companies should get federal small business contracts? My guess is you couldn't find anybody out there that would disagree with that. And yet this bill is going to have a tough time getting passed, because guess who's got more clout in Congress? The Fortune 500 firms are currently getting most federal small business contracts, are the 28 million small businesses where most Americans work. I think we know the answer to that. These big businesses are going to spend millions and millions and millions to try to kill this bill. So we've got to fight to not let that happen. America's a democracy. Let's get involved in our government. Let our senators and our Congress and President Obama know that he was right in February of 2008 when he said it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. And the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act will do just that. So let's get that passed. My name is Lloyd Chapman. I'm president of the American Small Business League, and thank you.